And that has to take a lot of courage for a government in an election year to do. And we think that His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akuffu-Addo will look to cut the size of his government in order to fit the challenges that we are facing. The other one you have to look at is, I program to do certain activities that have been disrupted. So for instance, today, a lot of our school children are at home. They were being fed by government 3 times a day. Now they are not going to be fed. So that becomes a savings that you must immediately be looking to cut away and to reduce the expenditure. We are almost in the middle of the financial year, and you program to spend about 8.5 billion on capital expenditure. It's obvious it can't happen. It cannot happen because even if you threw all the money at contractors, they cannot deliver that volume of work in 6 months. So once you cannot deliver that infrastructure that you program for a year, your first point of call is to cut down on your capital expenditure. And alone, we should be able to cut close to 3 to 4 billion of our capital expenditure, and it will be reasonable under the circumstances. Again, we must be able to understand that because we're going to roll out a lot of capital expenditure, we programmed goods and services that were needed to support that capital expenditure. So if I am not going to deliver the capital expenditure, why do I have to spend on the goods and services that was meant for that capital expenditure? So straight away, it means that you have to cut your goods and services in order to meet the low volume of infrastructure activities that you are going to carry out. We also realize that you program to borrow a lot of money just to fund these huge programs. And as a result of that, your deficit was at a certain level, and your debt portfolio was going to rise on account of you borrowing to fund the projects. Now that you are unable to develop those projects, it simply means that your borrowing regime has to come down. If you were able to cut all these expenditures, you create enough room to be able to have the space that you need so that you don't pay a lot of interest costs by continuously borrowing when the programs that you need to fund are no more in existence. So we expect that at this point in time, leadership is demonstrated by a good financial governance, which requires you to rationalize your costs. So far, we haven't heard government talking about costs. What government is thinking about is to still keep the inefficiency in the system and go and borrow for you and I to come and pay later. And that, for me, would be the worst that any government, less of all one led by the head of economic management team, who is the wizard in economics, to take this kind of decision. So I believe that the decision would be appropriately undertaken. But I have also taken a critical look at the budget that was presented to Parliament for 2020. And I realize that there is a lot of opportunity to be able to scale back on those expenditures. And if you give me a few minutes, I just want to refer to the budget statement for 2020 and demonstrate why we may not really need to spend a lot of money, because some of the items really don't make sense to me. Now, the government in the 2020 budget programmed, and there's a paragraph on 233. There's a paragraph 200, the page 233, there is an appendix called Appendix 6. And that appendix says that this is the cost of government flagship programs for 2020. In other words, all the flagship programs of government have been listed, and the cost that is captured in the budget have been listed. I want to take each of them and see whether really this represents value for money. So free SHS, we indicate that we are going to spend 2.4 billion on free SHS. That is one of the government flagship programs. How are we going to fund this? The government, when it went to borrow the $3 billion on the Eurobond market in January, provided Parliament with a schedule of utilization to tell us how they were going to use that money. And in that schedule of utilization, they indicated that they are going to spend about 2 billion of the Eurobond money on free SHS. Now, if your original total cost is 2.4 as listed here, and you go to borrow you go to borrow 2 billion, it means that you have a gap of how much? 400 million. But we noticed that the government also gave us an idea of how it was going to spend our oil money in the budget. And in that oil money, there is an item under page 232, which is breakdown of projected ABFA spending for 2020. ABFA is just an acronym for annual budget funding amount, which is the name we give to the component of our oil money that goes directly into the budget. So that money, under Office of Government Machinery, they say owing to free senior high school program, 1.2, almost 1.3 billion. So clearly you realize that this was over-programmed. Because you cannot be running a program for 2.4 billion. You borrow 2 billion to fund the same program, and you borrow 1.3 billion to fund the, then you take oil money of 1.3 billion to fund the same program. So if you put the oil money of 1.3 together with the Eurobond money of 2 billion, we're actually spending 3.3 billion for an expenditure that should be costing us 2.4 billion. The question is, where is the rest of the money going? Are you seeing the picture here? Where is the rest of the money going? Because you have given us the true cost of your flagship program. And you have indicated, number one, rightly so, that you will need only 2.4 billion to fund your flagship program. You are taking 1.2 or 1.3 billion from our oil money to fund that. We expect you to use the difference. Then you now tell us that you are actually borrowing 2 billion to add to that 1.2, 1.3 billion to fund an expenditure of 2.4 billion. It doesn't make sense. Clearly some gerrymandering is happening. You are seeing that. This is not me saying, this is their own document. And so you can see clearly that the item was over budgeted. What were they going to use with the rest of the money? That is a very big question. The other one is that they talk about infrastructure for poverty eradication program. This was supposed to be the one constituency, $1 million. And so $275 million, I don't know how they converted it to get 1 billion, but they got 1 billion. Out of that 1 billion, you come to the utilization of our oil money, and they indicate under the Ministry of Special Development Initiatives that the amount of money they are going to spend on development authorities, and the development authorities are the vehicles that they use to implement the 1 million per constituency. So you have the Northern Development Authority, you have the Coastal Development Authority, and you have the central, what do you call the central, or no, not Savannah, the Middle Belt. Good. So they are saying that they are spending under oil money, they are spending 755 million approximately to fund this 1 billion. So it means that you are left just about 250 million or 245 million to be okay. Is that not it? Then when they went to borrow the money from the Eurobond market, they now told us that they are spending 972 million on this same transaction. So you can see that close to 700 million of this money really is not meant for what they are indicating. Because you can have an expenditure for 1 billion, and you are using 972 million of Eurobond money, and you are still using 755 million of our oil money. If you add the two together, you know you are getting almost 1.7 billion for an expenditure that should be costing us 1 billion. Something is happening. So if your intention was to steal our money, now the money is not even there. Just be kind enough, to cut back. Then they say road infrastructure, the year of Rose. You remember the year of Rose? And they budgeted 1.2 billion for road infrastructure. 1.2 billion, all the year of Rose. That's about $200 million. In fact, that cannot construct the road from Bolga to Boko. And that is the year of Rose. But worst of all is that this year of Rose of 1.2 billion, they indicate here that they are going to use 1.2 billion of our oil money to fund this. And then they go to borrow money on the Eurobond market, and they are saying they are still going to spend the same 1.2 billion to fund the same expenditure. So, road infrastructure of 1.2 billion is now being funded with 2.4 billion. Who is taking the additional 1.2 billion? Where do you think it's going? So, fortunately, coronavirus, the money is just not even there. So, just be kind enough to cut all these wastes and save us money. Now, they say planting for, in fact, they say school feeding program. I don't know when school feeding program became a flagship program. This school feeding program that Akuffu-Addo fed, Professor Mills fed, John Mahama fed, suddenly is a flagship program. And they are budgeting 470. That has no problem because I'm not seeing it here. But planting for food and jobs, they have programmed 400 million under this appendix, cost of government flagship program, 400 million. Now you come to look at our oil money under food and agriculture. It's getting interesting, right? These people, they don't know that when they are stealing, they are not even smart. Just give me a second, let me fish it out.